Indiana State University Doctor in Athletic Training. We're going to be discussing the underserved populations in athletic training. My name is Chelsea Toney, and I work with the cheer and dance teams at Indiana State University.
Hi, my name is Shannon. I am a Doctorate of Athletic Training student at Indiana State, and I work with the Indiana State softball team.
I'm Sean, also in the Doctorate in Athletic Training, and I practice clinically with the men's basketball team at Indiana State.
Em and I, also a Doctorate in Athletic Training student, working with the Indiana State volleyball team.
I'm in the Indiana State University DAT, and I work with the cross-country and track and field team at ISG.
All right, so the first question we have is, are the administration and stakeholders in your clinical practice supportive to make the environment more inclusive at your specific facility? Does anyone want to start with that one? Do you feel like it is? Do you feel like it isn't? Why or why not?
I think at least from an education and academic standpoint, the faculty and staff, obviously at Indiana State University, do a good job of at least supporting inclusive policies, mostly because we're enrolled in this underserved and emerging setting course where one of the main objectives of the course is to become more culturally competent, or at least be able to educate others. As far as my actual clinical practice, I don't really see my administrators or stakeholders really involved in these types of policy making, and maybe that's because it's behind the scenes, but I think if I were proactive and said, hey, I really think we should add X, Y, and Z to a policy, or I really want to do this type of training with my colleagues, I think they would be supportive, but I don't really see a lot of proactivity.
I think I would definitely second that. I think when it comes to the education side of things, we see a lot of progressiveness, and we see a lot of making sure that we understand some of these underserved populations, and that might be on the fringes of healthcare. But when it comes to the clinical setting, it almost seems a little bit more stagnant. That just kind of like you said, unless someone brings it up, unless someone tries to push the issue, nothing is going to change. And I know there's actually been a few times with a few different topics in which, even with the issue being pushed, there was a lot of hesitancy to change. And when I actually think about this, and it's not quite exactly underserved populations, but at one point there was talk about adding a privacy tent at football games on the sidelines to try and protect patient privacy. And that was actually pushed back pretty hard against. And there's a few times I heard, well, that's kind of a useless idea. Now, while that's not necessarily underserved populations, I think it does kind of represent an ideology that a lot of clinicians face, is that sometimes we are a little bit resistant to change. That we feel that once we get in a good rut, so to speak, and things are going well, that it's not broke, don't fix. And that's kind of what I get.
I agree, and unfortunately I think it would take a breach in policy, or maybe even a lawsuit, in the conversation of, hey, we may not be providing the care to these individuals, and these individuals may recognize that and turn around and say, well, you don't have a policy. So I really think it would take something, much like it takes, unfortunately, an athlete dying to enact a policy or have policymakers kind of open their eyes. So I think it's a similar situation when it comes to underserved.
So what could our actions be with this right now? So I know we all work in the same facility, so what can our role be in that? I know we sit right at the front desk when people walk in. I think that's kind of one of the steps in it, just kind of providing that welcoming environment and the language towards all these individuals when they enter our facility. Maybe having the discussions with our supervisors, but again, they'll probably be resistant to certain things like that, especially with the new policies and policy changes.
I think one thing we can do is, at least from a specific population in the LGBT community, obviously we've talked a little bit about this week how those who who identify in the LGBT community are often harassed in the workplace, and that's patients and clinicians alike. So I think one very easy step that athletic trainers could take is to either attend a training or an ally training, or just simply put up a sign outside the athletic training room that says, "This is a safe place." And those student athletes that identify with that particular population see that although there's obviously a lot of stigma in sport, particularly with, football, maybe they're hesitant to come in and get patient care, but as long as there's a visual or some sort of sign or something they can observe before coming in the athletic training room, I think would make a huge difference.
And Emma, I like your idea of putting some kind of sign outside saying this is a safe place. Do you think also providing them with the opportunity to give feedback as if they do feel that they are in a safe environment when they leave, or just having the opportunity to give us feedback as if we're providing them with that care or not, and that gives us an idea of where we stand with that as well?
I think that the hard part with a training is you have to get someone who fully understands cultural competency in a very formal type of training. I think anyone could do some sort of informal training, but it won't be enough. You could say all you want involving cultural competency, but it's really, I think, one of the main ways that it will kind of work in this type of environment is just getting that exposure, and this especially is going to be the best thing in the professional setting. Just with the experience. I know some of the things that the research says are to hire people who hire minorities, but again, you can't always do that because of the job pool. I think it's difficult. I think it's good to lose yourself in that experience. And, you have to be the one who has to understand the culture and want to understand and what they're feeling, and the one to kind of combine them.
Britt, we're losing you. We lost the second half of what you said, but I got the first half, and I can see where you're coming from, with kind of being hesitant to have those trainings. But at the same time, I think the trainings can provide us with more information as to the language they use, and in one of the LGBT readings or videos we watched, they brought up some of the language that they use, how they identify themselves. They use the letter Q. Just kind of understanding those types of things. I know a lot of it is mostly about percentages and what type of populations and where you're seeing most of this, but I think we can also learn more from. There's also more to offer in these trainings than what we actually think. That's what I think, at least.
I know. I think so. I guess focusing on more of the general things, like the general language barriers, for example, even visual things such as pointing fingers, other things use final sensors, and if they don't like what you're doing, they think you're offensive, they don't think you're a healthcare provider. In addition, even with like time orientation, culture is taking that general time orientation, understanding what it means to other cultures, and that could affect their perception of us and the perception of our care that we give them. And another general thing, I guess, in any sort of training that we probably could do is understand the religions and fasting, how they fast, and what days they fast, and and everything like that, to understand even just the physiological side, that they need to watch out for them, and for them that with their we need to just respect them and talk to kids and tell them, look, you know who the student athlete is, fasting because of their religion, so we have to respect their religion and to just keep a lookout for them and just go easy on them, I guess. I think those general things are probably good in the sort of training.
I think kind of going back to what Emma was talking about like being a simple training. I know, like specifically, like I know, Brittany, you brought up religion. This week is Ramadan, and there's a lot of people that don't understand all the things that go into it. You know, we do have plenty of athletes in the NCAA who are Muslim and participate in Ramadan, and so being cognizant and aware of things that they can do, can't do, things things that are part of their culture that we have to make sure that we're being cautious about and also just aware of. I mean, it's not that we have to also participate, but it's just being aware of like things that they're taking value to in their religion. So a lot of that, I think it's just really important, just like being culturally aware. Even though you may not practice it yourself, but just being culturally aware of things that the athletes that we tend to, that is a part of their culture and their lifestyle.
I think it comes down a lot to the students and the way we're teaching our students and going beyond the one competency in the handbook that says, you know, this student is culturally competent, and you get a check mark next to the student's name and they don't think about it again. And I think if the students are put in these settings where, much like the athletic trainer that we listened to this week talked about, I believe it was in Cleveland, she had a football team and they participated in Ramadan and she didn't know what to do. And she obviously turned to the research, which was good, but I think even starting the conversation in the undergraduate programs and going beyond just the cultural competence proficiency will help a lot.
So, yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I think it also brings up a good point, is that when you think about underserved populations, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I mean, initially when we think of underserved populations, we think of, okay, maybe it's ethnic minority. And we think, okay, maybe it's someone like in the LGBTQ community, but at the same time, there's so many other underserved populations out there that we might not even recognize. Maybe you have a population that lost their family. Maybe you have a population that's an orphan. Maybe they have some sort of infectious disease. Maybe they have a severe mental disorder, something like depression. Maybe they have a cognitive disorder that we don't know. And I think that really hit on what that video was talking about, is sometimes you're hit with these situations where you absolutely don't know. And I think that really separates a good clinician from an excellent clinician. If you just kind of go along with how you practice when you encounter these situations, okay, if you're still providing patient care, you're a good clinician, but an excellent clinician, someone who's really focused on providing the best patient care possible and trying to increase the efficacy of that transfer of knowledge and of care, is going to go and try and reach out, maybe go into the research, maybe talk to the individual and trying to get more information, maybe seek out a training. I think that's what's really important. Now, the one thing that I have a concern with about training is I feel like sometimes it's very inorganic. And I say this because, just like Emma brought up the point that sometimes it takes something major to happen for policy change to be enacted, sometimes it takes something major or for someone to realize that they don't know something for them to seek out that knowledge. And I hate to say this because I absolutely love my alma mater at Washington State, but the program director for the athletic training education program forced all of the preceptors to take a cultural competency training that lasted 2 hours. And it became a huge joke between every single preceptor, and we had 18 certified athletic trainers, so much so that they posted it up above their desk and said, oh, this is my wonderful cultural competency certificate that I'm going to get an amazing job with. When in reality, they took this online training course and they had to listen to someone in a room where they were just on their cell phones the entire time, and then they clicked through a curriculum course. Now, that really saddens me to say that, but I think it really hits home the point, and not every place is the same, but there really needs to be a want or some sort of something behind getting a training like that, in my opinion, so that people actually absorb the knowledge.
Oh yeah, it can't be forced. You have to want to be willing to accommodate for those needs. You can't just get some sort of training and then, oh, you're culturally competent, you're able to serve the underserved population. That's not how it works. I agree with you on that, Tom.
And it's definitely something that, like, you can't just go to one class and all of a sudden you're like, I know everything about culture. Like, this is definitely a situation that, like, you have to be working on. It's not something that you can do one class on. You need to constantly be looking at other cultures, or just maybe, like, I know, like, not all of us have time and everything, but, like, just look at the news, see what's going on in the world. There's a lot of things that, like, it's easy to say, like, I'm culturally aware of everything, but I mean, if you're not in today's news and knowing what's going on, I mean, how much are you really part of the culture?
So should these programs be providing more cultural competency courses for the students instead of just providing them with the training? Should they be involved a bit more other than just one class?
I think what we really need to hit at is not giving the students cultural competency training. It's almost trying to shape how they think about cultural competency. Because if we can change the way that they perceive cultural competency, and we can frame it in such a way that the lack of cultural competency is actually a problem and it affects their healthcare of these populations, I think that's going to be the most important. And I think that we should train, but I don't think that we can have effective training unless we start kind of creating that mindset and giving them the tools to create that mindset for themselves.
I agree, because I think if you, sorry, go ahead. I think if you asked at least the undergraduates at our current institution, and maybe your alma maters, at least mine, if you ask them what diversity is or what diversity means to them, I think a lot of them would say black and white. They would say, I have a couple African American or Asian Americans in my class, and that's what diversity means to me, because that's the diversity that they're seeing. So I agree with your point, Sean, that we need to open up their minds in a way of thinking, because if it's just based on their observations, that we're not going to get there.
I was looking at some of the research. It might have been outside of Dr. James' readings that he gave us for this week, but one thing that someone mentioned was, I guess, some sort of critical thinking component, Sean, like you were saying, instead of just having training, is, I guess, trying to engage students and clinicians in, I guess, researching any sort of medical errors that happened during that year and trying to relate it to any sort of on that one hand. I mean, it'll seem like it's very difficult, but that's sort of a big critical thinking component. Researching any medical error that's occurred over the year and see if it had to do with some sort of cultural competency, and out that way.
So have any of you ever noticed a situation in which an underserved population was mistreated, and did you step in or did you not step in? Did you just sit back and watch? Anyone have anything to?
Yeah,
Shine your mics off.
I feel really bad about this to this day, and it's something that really hits close to home. When I was an undergrad, and I was a senior in undergrad, we had a football player who identified with the LGBT community, and the football program there was not very friendly to the LGBT community, and this player, for the best of his ability, at least from what I knew, tried to keep it a little bit more under wraps. And at one point, he kind of confided in me that he didn't feel super comfortable, coming in here for treatments all the time because some of the language that happened, both perpetrated by the athletes that are in there, the students, and some of the preceptors, and it just so happened that one of the athletic trainers overheard that, and he basically said, "Oh, don't be you can insert word here that you want to insert. I'm not going to say. Just buck up. I don't care what you are. Just buck up." And I was so shocked that I didn't say anything. And in that moment, I think about it. It's actually kind of getting me a little bit emotional. I really wish I would have gone back and I would have said, "No, that's not okay." Later on, when I saw that athlete and I saw him again, as a student, I pulled him aside and I said, "I'm sorry, that's not okay. I promise, this is not how we are." And like a month down the road, through the help of my program director, we had a conversation with the football staff. But I really, really wish in that moment in time as a student, I would have stood ground for this individual that I was providing care for and said, no, that's not okay. We don't say that. Because I felt it would have made a big difference, even coming from a student, standing up to someone who is above me. So that's definitely one thing that I think about almost daily when it comes to making sure who's around me and how they act and how they speak, and making sure that everyone is at least somewhat comfortable in the environment that they're in.
Yeah, I kind of know kind of exactly how you feel about that, because I was kind of put in the same situation. It was during tryouts, and this individual who was trying out was slightly overweight, but she just had, her muscle build was just very strong, and she was African American. The coach was blatantly talking to me about coming up with a whole bunch of different reasons to not accept her onto the team. But her main reasons were for those other two reasons, and I was going to address it, but I was talked down about it and convinced not to by my supervisor. And by the time I had been able to create the letter and figure out how I was going to get this sent, she basically told me it was too late and I shouldn't do it because it was going to make our athletic training facility look bad if it ever got back. And so I think I do regret not getting that sent out. And if I had gotten it sent out sooner and just did it, I think I would have felt better about it, because situations like this are just going to continue to keep happening.
But I think you make a good point about you, I'm assuming, have never really been in that situation before, and I don't know. Sean, you probably never had those types of conversation with your undergraduate classmates, like, hey, what do we do when this happens? Like, sure, yes, we know when that athlete comes in and they have shoulder pain, we know what to do, and we don't have to ask questions, but we were never prepared to make those types of decisions or deal with those types of conversations. So I think now that you both have that type of an experience and you've been in those situations, I don't think it'll happen again. And we're all better off because of you two and your experience.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of Emma is going back to undergrad. I mean, how many hours have we spent on how to diagnose a shoulder pathology or a knee pathology, but how many times have we actually gone over and put time into the psychosocial part of working with an athlete? There's so many times where, we know how to what to listen for a eating disorder or for a possible suicide situation, but we don't know how to handle some of the situations of a athlete or a patient confiding in you for their sexual orientation or how things are at home or something like that, where there's only so much information that we know about that. We know like a little bit, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just having ears to listen. It's also, who to refer to, what people do we need to talk to, or like just how to be emotionally connected to your patient.
So a question.
That's huge, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
A question for everyone, and this isn't the easiest question, I apologize. In our clinical sites, and I'm sure this applies to other places in life, there's a lot of people who don't want to challenge the status quo. There's a lot of people who don't want to make waves, and I know myself, whenever I've tried to challenge the status quo, sometimes I've been called a social justice warrior in that sense. And how do we educate individuals who potentially don't think it's a good idea to stand up for this population because, oh, it's just the way it is, we work in athletics, or maybe we shouldn't advocate for that person because that's just the way it is? How do we change that? Is it through education? Is it through advocacy? How do we gently change that without creating a huge argument and divide that would only separate us further in the workplace? How do we bridge that gap?
Well, for me, just quickly before someone else jumps in, I think it has a lot to do with the leadership that's in the facility, because if they're not providing that environment for you to be able to speak up, and you feel like, oh, I'm just gonna sit back and just let it happen because I don't want them to come back at me. I don't feel like getting in an argument. I think that's a huge part of it, because they're setting that environment for you to feel that way. And so it doesn't make it any easier for us, and I don't have the answer, so maybe someone else can speak up for what we can do, but I feel like the leadership in the facility definitely can have a huge part in that, and setting the environment for allowing us to be able to speak up that way.
Sean, that's a tough question. Part of me wants to say educate, 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 and then there's another part that's like this. Having that openness, I mean, that stems back to like childhood, what our parents are teaching us, what the leaders of today are teaching the youth of tomorrow. I mean, what can we do right now currently? Like I said before, I think it's just educating ourselves. Like I said, like you don't need to be a part of that community or whatever community, whether it's religious or, like I said, anything else. Like it can be just educating yourself. I think there's a lot of aspects and components that go into that of how to change everything. But because there are some people that, they were brought up a certain way, that's just how their mind is going to think. And there's other times where you're going to meet people that are way more open to other situations or aspects. But I think the best thing that we can do right now is just to educate ourselves that there are other opinions and cultures out there.
I think it's through not only education but action as well. It makes me think of like the female athletic trainers in the NFL. Like I'm sure that those people did not go up in front of a board and say, well, here are the statistics on female athletic trainers versus male athletic trainers, and this is my skill set. They just applied to the job, and they just worked their way up, and they just networked, and they just did it. And I feel like as much as we can educate, and I think it's important, we also at some point just have to do it and just have to be role models. And I think that's a huge thing we all know in this program, is that we are clinical practice leaders. And I mean, if we don't do it, I don't think someone graduating, from the bachelor's degree or the ELM is going to do it. Not first, at least.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Emma. Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
I think, and I don't want to get like super cheesy and super metaphorical here, but when you think of like the Grand Canyon wasn't made in a day. It was made over thousands and thousands of years of water running through this area, and I think that applies to what we're talking about too. One action is not going to change the way an entire clinic, an entire profession thinks, but as soon as those actions start piling up, and as soon as those actions start becoming visible. So, and not saying anyone wouldn't here, but for example, if I maybe stood up for something in the clinic, and Shannon, you were random bystanders, and you saw, okay, this person stood up. I held similar to you, but I didn't want to stand up for it. No, I'm going to stand up for it because someone laid that pathway. Not saying that you wouldn't stand up for initially, but I think that's how it's going to go in the profession. And I think that's just as, I think it was Emma just said, I think that's what we need to realize as leaders, that we need to be some of those agents of change. And that if we really feel passionate about something, sometimes sticking your neck out there and being that agent of change is going to start that process, that gradual process, bringing something into the light to where it can change, and it can go from kind of radical social justice warrior to the norm.
Absolutely.
So going back to our specific facility, if any of you were a patient in our clinic, would you feel comfortable expressing your individual cultural or faith-based needs?
I think it depends on where I am I mean,
I feel the same way.
I have heard in the main athletic training room multiple athletes, and it's not just male football players, and it's not just male basketball players, because that's a huge stigma, but it's athletes that say and make derogatory terms. And, you know, if I was either an ethnic minority or identified in LGBT and I was a student athlete here, I'm not sure that if I heard those terms or phrases, whatever you want to call it, and nobody said anything, and no athletic trainer said, one, watch your mouth, or two, get out, and everybody just kind of slid it under the table, I would recognize that that's not a priority to this facility. So, no, I don't think when there's a lot of athletes in the main athletic training room, you know, lots going on, and there's things that need to be done, and there's treatments, and people need to get on a practice, and we forget that the little comments hurt the people that are listening. I don't think I would feel comfortable.
Emma, I agree. Sean, do you want to go ahead, or do you want me to go?
Exactly what Emma said.
I know.
When
yeah.
Even in staff meetings, when I hear joking comments from different staff members, that even in the past that I've attempted to politely correct it, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable. It's the same exact thing Emma said. Exact.
Yeah, and the environment that is there, if someone were to say something and you wanted to make a comment to say that wasn't appropriate, I feel like it would just start a whole argument, because that's how some people are. And so it's not just the athletes, it's the staff that's to create that environment too. So I'm with Emma. I'd prefer to be across the street and probably just with my own team versus with everybody else.
And it's obviously up to us as well to say,
yeah,
to not say, you know, well, that's X's team and that's not my team, so that's not really my place. Like, at some point, we just got to look out for the bigger picture and the student athletes at this university and not think like we're stepping on toes.
Right, and that brings up a whole other topic of difficult conversations, because that's huge with this.
Yeah, and I mean, so that's three of us that said that we wouldn't feel comfortable as an athlete being treated in our own facility. And Emma, you kind of touched on it, but what can we do as clinicians to change how we feel about our facility? I know myself, I personally want to, and I'm going to be a lot more, I almost want to use the word intense, especially when I hear language like that. And I know when it comes to my team, and again, exactly what Emma just said, when it comes to my team and I see my team, I really, really harp on them when it comes to derogatory language. And with the men's basketball team, unfortunately, sometimes they do fit that stereotype. They do have potty mouths, and they are crazy, and they are men, and they just say whatever they want to say. And I do my best to try and tone that down. But at the same time, I don't go up to a football athlete, I don't go up to a softball athlete or a cheer athlete, and I don't correct them. I've never done that. I've heard things and I haven't done that, and that's one thing that I need to work on personally. So just as Emma said, it's a whole facility, and yes, I have my team that I'm contracted to clinically, but that doesn't mean that that environment is not part of my responsibility. What do you guys want to do to fix that?
I mean, like you said, Sean, like, is speaking up, like you said, with other teams. My team, I mean, with softball, there's not too many derogatory terms thrown out around, but I mean, if I do hear something like even just cursing, like when I hear other people curse, I'm like, hey, watch your mouth. Like, this is still a professional environment. And, you know, you don't go to the doctor's office and just start dropping F-bombs. You don't go to your PT and just start cussing them out. Like, I don't see why we should tolerate that where other clinics don't either. So whenever I do hear, you know, just potty mouths, I just say hey, watch your mouth, watch it. You don't need to do a whole big speech about it, but just hey, clean it up. You know, they don't want to be, you know, they know that, you know, cursing or something like that isn't right. But I mean, if you just like give them a hint of like that's not okay, you don't need to embarrass them in front of their peers or anything, but just knowing that like what they're saying is not okay.
Brittany, do you have anything to add about this? Brett, you there? All right. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add in regards to the underserved populations in your own facilities, on your specific sports teams? Have you had any issues with the coaches where you've had to approach them?
I think I haven't had any specific issues with coaches, either speaking poorly of the underserved populations in my clinical practice, which are not very many people, which I'm thankful for, but I don't work in a very diverse environment in terms of my team, like we've been talking about, but I think that what we just talked about for the last 5 minutes would also apply to my coaching staff. While I think that it would be much difficult to approach my coach and say, hey, what you're saying is rude and offensive to these people. But again, if we just can't sit back and bitch about it, and if I make a pact or promise to my athletes to keep them safe, that applies to everybody.
That's true. My difficult thing right now is approaching my coach about it because it's huge with my coach, and I'm gonna admit it. I'm scared to approach her about it. I have to work on that because it's getting to the point where it's very inappropriate.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes when we think about difficult conversations like that too, we think of it as like a tense me versus you, this is going to turn into a really escalated situation. There's a lot of different ways you can address it too. And like, especially like sometimes, and it depends, like I know with my coaching staff I wouldn't really use humor, but sometimes you could be like, oh, wow, I can't believe you just said that, and like just kind of like joke around, like in a more like upbeat tone. It's not like super accusatory, but at the same time, the point is out there, and they might still get it, or something of that nature. And sometimes it does take some creativity when you work with very strong personalities like that, and then you just come back to the okay, is this important enough that I'm going to do it? And that's a personal decision for every situation, every person.
You're very right, Sean. All right, so we've talked about ways we can improve our facility and possibly helping our students out through education in regards to the underserved population. This has come to you from the Indiana State University Doctor in Athletic Training students, and we hope you've enjoyed listening.